It's 5:30 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. You're watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. U.S. specialist military jet arrives in the Middle East as tensions with Iran remain high. Chinese President Xi Jinping cautions the U.S. president to be prudent in the supply of arms to Taiwan. Plus, UK Reform leader Nigel Farage says Mandelson's scandal is the biggest of the century. Let's begin World Today. Our journey begins in the Middle East, where flight tracking data suggests the U.S. is continuing to fly specialist military aircraft as tensions with Iran remain high. A dozen F-15 fighter jets, an MQ-9 Reaper combat drone, and several A-10C Thunderbolt II ground attack aircraft have arrived at Mufag Salti Air Base in Jordan. The BBC has been following a guided missile destroyer ship, the USS Delbert D. Black, as it sailed through the Suez Canal in Egypt from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, and a U.S. Navy MQ-4C Triton surveillance drone operating over the Gulf. Alongside the E-11A communications aircraft, they've also kept tabs on a P-8 Poseidon and E-3G Sentry surveillance and reconnaissance planes that have also been moved into the region. In the meantime, the U.S. and Iran are scheduled to hold talks in Oman on Friday. Mediators from Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt have presented in Iran, and the U.S. represented both countries with a framework of key principles to be discussed in the talks. U.S. officials, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff are already in the Qatari capital Doha ahead of the talks. The U.S. has been pushing for discussions on Iran's biggest stockpiles of ballistic missiles to be discussed in Friday's meetings. Despite comments from Iranian officials, it was off the table. Israel has likened the danger of Iran's missiles to its nuclear program, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying in January Iran's attempt to build atomic weapons and 20,000 ballistic missiles were like two lumps of cancer. At the same time, Iran has built influence around the region by supporting armed groups, including Hamas, Lebanon's Hezbollah, and Yemen's Houthis, known collectively as the Axis of Resistance. A former U.S. National Security Advisor, John Bolton, says there is essentially no chance of a possible agreement between the U.S. and Iran, calling the meetings a waste of oxygen. We have joining us former Israeli national spokesman Ilan Levy. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ilan, thank you for joining us on the program today. And I'm sure that all eyes are on, on Oman, on Friday for those talks that Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and the Iranian officials will be attending. But there does seem to be some uncertainty surrounding the talks about to hold. Both parties will be on their guard tomorrow. Why are there so many misgivings about these talks on Friday?
The United States has given Iran an ultimatum. It wants a comprehensive deal that will see the Islamic Republic stop being a threat to the rest of the region and, frankly, to its own citizens. It wants a deal that will end the nuclear program, end Iran's ballistic missile industry, end its support for terrorist proxy groups around the region, and protect the human rights of protesters in Iran who have, of course, been slaughtered in the streets. But the Islamic Republic has been rejecting that. For the Ayatollah regime, the support of terrorist groups throughout the Middle East, the development of ballistic missiles, the internal repression and the brutal way they've been treating their own people, those are integral parts of how the regime has been keeping itself alive. So the feeling in Israel now is that in an ideal world, it would be nice if we had a deal that Iran stops being a threat to the region and to itself. But the Islamic Republic is likely to refuse that. And President Trump has threatened Iran with very firm consequences if it continues down that path of aggression.
So, what is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's suggestion to the U.S.? Because I know Israel will be looking out for the outcome of the meeting, even though there is not, much confidence placed on the discussions or, on the Iranian side, especially. They've called out Iran's development of nuclear weapons, as you rightly said. They've even targeted them in previous attacks. So, what would the Prime Minister be saying to the U.S. instead, in case, you're true to the predictions you're making, these talks really don't work out?
Yeah, the Israeli government is holding a national security meeting right now because if the United States chooses to attack Iran, we expect that Iran will retaliate by taking it out against us, and that they will target Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities with ballistic missile fire, just like we had in the 12-day war over the summer. And so Israel's priority is keeping its own people safe if Iran retaliates against us. But I think what Israel will be telling the United States behind closed doors is that the Iranian regime is at its weakest point that it's ever been. Let's remember, 2 years ago, the Iranian regime had powerful proxy militias in the region. It controlled Gaza through Hamas, Lebanon through Hezbollah. It controlled Syria through the Assad regime, Yemen through the Houthis. And now Iran is weaker than it has ever been. And so, if now is not the time to help the people of Iran who have been taking to the streets demanding their freedom, President Trump promised help is on its way. If now is not the time to bring an end to the regime that cries death to America and death to Israel and bring freedom to Iran, well, that's an opportunity that may never come back. But more than Israel's interests, really the United States' credibility is on the line here, because President Trump told those protesters in Iran, go out, claim your institutions, help is on its way. And if the United States folds and accepts a partial deal on the nuclear program, but leaves the ballistic missiles intact, leaves Iran's terrorist proxies intact, allows the Iranian regime to continue hanging people who have been protesting for democracy, that undermines the United States' credibility and its ability to deter the United States' own enemies.
And what would be the reaction for Israel? I mean, Israel is still in Gaza, still carrying out attacks against Hamas, despite the peace deal that was signed between the two sides, a ceasefire deal, which states that, which has a leeway given by the United States that if an Israeli soldier is attacked, of course, if Israel is attacked in any way, then Israel does have the right to go ahead and retaliate those attacks in Gaza. And that has been going on. We've seen those attacks happening. What will be Israel's reaction when these talks do collapse tomorrow?
Well, despite the ceasefire deal with Hamas, Hamas is not disarming. Despite the ceasefire deal, Hamas is not relinquishing power. And that's what phase 2 of the ceasefire says. It says Hamas must relinquish its weapons and leave power. But Hamas is refusing to do that. Instead, it is hijacking and taxing the vast amounts of humanitarian aid that have entered Gaza in order to reestablish its terrorist regime, every day trying to cross the ceasefire line and attacking Israeli soldiers. So Israel is concerned that the diplomatic path that the United States wants to pursue to end Hamas will not be successful because it is a genocidal terrorist regime that wants to destroy the state of Israel. And so Israel will be hoping that if the Hamas refuses to do that, the United States will give Israel its full backing to exhaust the military option against Hamas.
We seem to have lost signal with you, video signal that is. But for Ireland, if you can hear me, just finally, what the impacts would be for the rest of the region. I know that there are so many interested parties in these talks, and they really want, the U.S. and Iran to come to a deal at least sometime soon to provide some stability for that axis.
The Saudi defense minister has warned that if the United States does not follow through with its ultimatum against Iran, that is a threat to American deterrence, and that would embolden Iran. No one wants to see an all-out war, but no one wants to see the Iranian regime going back to the path of aggression arming those terrorist forces that have brought such chaos to the Middle East, and developing a ballistic missile program that threatens all of its neighbors, not just Israel. So there is hope that diplomacy will force the Iranians to recognize reality, which is that if the regime wants to survive, it has to cut a deal that transforms Iran into a peaceful regional actor. But then again, this is a fundamentalist religious regime, and very few people have hopes that the leopard is going to change its spots.
Ilon, thanks again for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you.
We're off on a short break on The World Today. Still ahead, over 200 companies from Russia, China, and Iran gathering to showcase an aviation and drone exhibition at the Russian capital. Do stay with us. Welcome back, and staying with international relations. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called Taiwan the most important issue in China-U.S. relations during a phone call with President Donald Trump of the United States. President Xi told his U.S. counterpart to be prudent when supplying weapons to the island. State media reporting that he attached great importance to ties with Washington and hoped both sides would find ways to resolve their differences. Trump described the call as excellent and long and thorough. It followed a flurry of visits by Western leaders, including the UK's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, to China in recent months, hoping to reset relations with the world's second largest economy. Trump himself is due to visit China in April, a trip he says he looks forward to very much, adding that Beijing is considering buying 20 million tons of U.S. soybeans, up from the current 12 million tons. And the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has made a public apology to victims of US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, saying sorry for having believed Mandelson's lies. In an address just hours ago, Starmer said he understands the anger and frustration of Labour MPs at his decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as US Ambassador in 2024. The Prime Minister again accuses Mandelson of lying during the vetting process, saying he gave the impression he barely knew the disgraced financier. This comes after lawmakers mounted pressure on Mr. Starmer in Parliament yesterday about Mandelson. In the meantime, Number 10 Downing Street says discussions have begun with Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee on the process of releasing documents relating to Peter Mandelson's appointment as US Ambassador. The PM's official spokesman says when they have agreed on a process, the government will update the House of Commons.
Just to be clear, to vote to release something that would prejudice national security is wrong in principle. The second exemption is in relation to things that would prejudice international relations. There will be discussions about security and intelligence and trade, which are highly sensitive to the two countries involved and to third countries. Well, they have to ask themselves whether they want to vote to prejudice our national security. I don't think they do. I don't think, in fairness, that they do. But can I reassure the House, Mr. Speaker? Let me reassure the House. The process for deciding what falls into those categories will not be a political process. It will be led by the Cabinet Secretary, supported by government legal teams. So they will be looking at the question of prejudice. They will be making that decision. The only additional thing I just want to put before the House, because there was a discussion this morning with the Metropolitan Police, is that we are in discussions with them about any material that they're concerned will prejudice their investigation.
Same with the story, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage claims the Prime Minister is facing what he calls the biggest scandal in a century in a row over his former ambassador's links to Jeffrey Epstein as he attended a regional election launch event in Newport, Wales.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted, because he had to, that despite the fact he'd known that Mandelson had continued his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein even after he'd been sent to prison, for underage prostitution. Despite the fact the Prime Minister knew that, he still appointed Mandelson to be our ambassador in Washington. But don't think this scandal is just another political scandal. It isn't just sort of Partygate, but a bit bigger. No, this involves sex, it involves money, it involves the royal family, it involves the leaking of market-sensitive, confidential information. I suspect it's pretty close, in many ways, to breaching the Official Secrets Act. This is far bigger than the Profumo scandal of 60 years ago. This is the biggest scandal in British politics for over 1 century. And I would predict pretty confidently, I said this yesterday, but I stick by it, I'd predict that Morgan McSweeney, the chief advisor, will be gone pretty quickly. I don't know how long Starmer will last as Prime Minister. Indeed, I'm very worried about it. If he does last up until May the 7th, our job, your job, as our candidates, our activists, our supporters, our donors, your job in the run-up to May the 7th is to make sure he isn't there for very much longer after that.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the number of Ukrainian soldiers killed on the battlefield in the 4 years of war with Russia is now 55,000. He announced the figure in an interview with France 2 on Wednesday. Additionally, a large number of people are considered officially missing. While both Kyiv and Moscow have regularly published estimates of the other side's losses, they've been reluctant to detail their own. However, the BBC's investigations confirm the names of almost 160,000 people killed in fighting on Russia's side in Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump has been leading efforts to end the war that began with Russia's full-scale invasion of its neighbor on February 22, 2022. Special U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, held talks with Russian and Ukrainian negotiators in the capital of the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, for a second day today in an effort to try and thrash out details of the U.S. proposed peace deal. We're still in Europe, but turning our attention now to child well-being. Across the continent, momentum is growing to restrict children's access to social media, with several governments now actively debating or moving towards bans for under-16s. Following Australia's decision, several countries are stepping up discussions or advancing legislation that would significantly limit how young people use platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat. For more on this, let's talk to the DW's Thomas Sparrow, who joins us now. Thomas, great to have you on the program. So which of the European countries are currently taking the strongest steps towards banning social media for people under 16?
Spain and Greece are among the latest European countries to propose bans for under-16 social media use. In fact, the head of the Spanish government, Pedro Sánchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, stressed that it was time to regain control of the digital space, saying also that it was a digital Wild West. And the Spanish government is also planning to go even a step further by making it possible to hold social media executives personally, legally accountable for illegal content that is spread on their platforms. A proposal that was strongly rebuked by the head of X, by the owner of X, Elon Musk, on his platform. That is one of the proposals that is being discussed here in Europe, in Spain, in Greece. Other countries that are much further in the discussion are specifically France and Denmark. But there's also a discussion at a wider European level as to what needs to be done to better protect teenagers when it comes to their online social media use.
Thomas, I wonder what the situation is in Germany. How far along is the national debate there?
The discussion here in Germany is not as advanced as in Spain or even in France or Denmark. There is an expert commission in place that is expected to present its findings sometime this year, maybe even in the autumn of this year. But that doesn't go as far as what's happening in other parts of Europe. However, there is a big debate, a social debate in the country as to what should be the next steps also here in Germany. Those who favor a social media ban stress that excessive social media use is linked to high rates of anxiety, depression, cyberbullying, and that therefore something needs to be done at the government level to better protect children and teenagers. Those who are against it, who view such a ban critically, stress, on the one hand, that it could push teenagers underground, that it could restrict them from serious news and information that they need, and that maybe it's very difficult to enforce at a European Union level. And they have also stressed, the critics, that it is not for the government to make those decisions, but it's also for the parents specifically to make those decisions. So you see, there's a big debate here in the country, but from the government perspective, the move now is specifically on that government commission, expert commission, that is going to present its findings in the next few months.
Understood, Thomas. Now, how does this fit into wider EU-level efforts to regulate minors' access to social media?
That is actually a very important question, because any decision at the national level taken by Germany or by Spain or by Portugal or by France or by Denmark needs to fit with the wider European Union structures, and specifically with the so-called Digital Services Act, or DSA. That's the law at the European Union level that, among other things, protects minors when it comes to their online social media use. There are several parts of that DSA that are specifically designed to protect children online. And as such, this is part of the discussion in Europe, how to make sure that national discussions and national decisions fit with a major European law like the DSA. Now, the European Parliament did pass a call last year calling for European countries specifically to ban social media use for under 16, but that is a non-binding resolution. It does, however, increase pressure on European governments to do much more. So what we're seeing here in Europe specifically this year is that the debate will very likely grow, and we will see individual countries actually taking concrete steps to ban social media use for under 16s.
Some very serious conversations there, Thomas. Thank you again for bringing us up to speed on that. As we're ending the world today, a major civil aviation and drone technology exhibition has opened at the Crocus Expo Center near Moscow in Russia. The organizers say more than 200 companies from Russia, Belarus, Iran, and China are taking part. The two-day National Aviation Infrastructure Show features state-of-the-art technologies for airports and airlines. Leading Russian defense contractors, including Kalashnikov, Almaz Anti, Zala Aero Group, and Supercam Unmanned Systems Group, are all showcasing their products. Around 15 Chinese contractors specializing in airport services are taking part. Ahead of the business development was explaining, some of the products that they have. She said the Russian government's plan to build or modernize 75 airports across the country presents lucrative business opportunities for the company. Well, we are not quite done yet, it appears. Steamed buns have been elevated from everyday comfort food to center stage artworks at the China National Museum of Arts and Crafts in Beijing, where an exhibition celebrating the upcoming Lunar New Year is drawing large crowds. Artists have reshaped simple dough into an elaborate display of sculptural pieces. You know what? We'll tell you all about it tomorrow. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.